it's not the end of the world if it's lost to posterity. But it might be amazing. Who knows what we'll talk about? And the idea, of course, is to have a conversation rather than to be lectured to, which is a great challenge for me because I love giving lectures. The title of this, Healthy and Wealthy with Less, and then the subtitle, the text to that, the narrative for that was, what if we used our carbon footprint to define how wealthy we are, rather than how much we own? Would that lead to a healthier, happier, wealthier people, community, and planet? So that's a sort of it's a bit of a provocative, possibly not question of, what is wealth and how do we measure it? So rather than, I've got a few things to say about that, but I'd like to start with just having a go round, really, to ask you what your take on that question is. In any particular, no particular order.
Can you repeat the question, please? Just
yeah. So the question is, what's wealth to you? I mean, how do you define wealth?
If I don't particularly see wealth in monetary terms. Wealth to me is my health and having my family. Things I enjoy, like walking the fells, and that to me is far more important than any amount of money I've got in the bank or not.
Okay. Sorry, Anna.
It's a really hard question, because I think for me, wealth is a certain mindset, and it comes back to this idea of gratitude and seeing the world with an abundance mindset. So there are lots of situations where people could describe their situation as being quite poor, but if you start thinking about what you're grateful for within any situation, whether that's a healthy body, communities of support around you, sunshine, access to countryside, it switches everything, and you go from what I now call a scarcity mindset in today's world to like an abundance mindset. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a mind frame of how we look at the world and how we appreciate what we have. And so if I think of it in that, I tend to think of wealth linked to health of both myself, the communities around me, and the environment that I'm living in and what it offers. Yeah.
Marvelous. David, if you want to type something, I'll read that out to people.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, can hear you. Yes, David, welcome.
Thank you. Let's hope the bandwidth keeps up. I'm slightly struggling with the question because, I mean, I have an idea of well-being and things that promote wholeness and well-being, and I tend to keep that separate from the word wealth, which I think of in strictly conventional terms. And it's kind of interesting the way you've posed the question, bringing those together. I mean, I think we can all agree that X million pounds of the bank does very little or nothing to promote well-being past the amount of money that's required to cover what we need to keep body and soul together. I mean, but I mean, there are things that make me feel really good or promote well-being that cost quite a lot of money, such as being able to hear really good music, go to the theatre, even the opera, and I guess I mean, it's great to talk about sunshine and natural beauty as a form of wealth, if you like, but there's a cultural dimension which depends upon being able to cooperate with people, and with people who are dedicated artists and who have worked incredibly hard to produce a musical performance or book or whatever, and need somehow to be remunerated for their time in order to make that dedicated effort possible.
Thank you, David. Ruta?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking back in times when I grew up in a community that had literally nothing when they arrived because they had to leave their home country. And wealth was covering all that actually keeps a human being alive, living beings, their basic needs. And it was tremendous wealth when you found water, when you found food. Obviously, we were growing our own food. And the community coming together, and right in there also a lot of creativity. In order to stay alive, you have to be quite creative and you have to be adaptable. And we always had this sense of abundance because nature was really beautiful around us. And mostly the community was quite caring, really. Not always coping by any means, but of course, as a matter of consciousness, being very, very aware that there are basic things that we do need, that everybody needs. So there's a common denominator. And there is something of a human capacity that does include all this creativity and goodwill towards each other. And so if you can actually remain in that space, things seem to kind of flow differently from when everybody is in a bubble where they are just filling it up with short-term satisfaction. And yeah, so we had some very gifted people around there. And it's been very difficult trying to recreate it. I read yesterday that Lancaster is the happiest place to work and live in. It made me smile, you know. I really thought, hey, well, you know, there's something out there on the move, and I'm daily online looking at people's comments, and again, there is a common denominator. People do want to have a better, healthier world. They do not want to trash the planet. At least nobody that I know. So there is a sort of, yeah, it feels a little bit beset by knowing that there are damages out there, but also hope if one sees that there are so many people who want to prevent it and actually improve on it. And are very, very conscious. I mean, right down to the science of it. Yeah, and the goodwill and the skills. Yeah.
Thank you. Ian?
What was the question?
The question
was... Sorry, somebody came to my door, so I had to switch everything off to deal with that. And then I came back and people are talking. I missed something here. Go on.
You did. What's wealth to you? What does wealth mean to you?
What does wealth mean to me? That's a really interesting question, actually. I grew up in a working class Lancaster family. There were times when we had no money and we had to sell the family silver to feed ourselves. But we've kind of gone through life. We're still together as a family and in contact with each other. I think, so therefore, two things I would say make for wealth for me, regardless of what's around. Number one is a sense I belong. So I have no doubt I belong. And I think the second thing is you've got to have a reason for getting out of bed in the morning. So that will be my religious faith. It touches on some of the stuff Anna was saying about mindset. My mind, needs to be reshaped by the truth, and so that's my daily exercise, to restate by truth and try and live that as much as possible. A bit profound, sorry about that, but you know, I get paid for it. It's what they pay me for, so you know, I've got to come out with it now and again.
It's absolutely fine, you know, without not putting artificial boundaries on the conversation, on the definitions here. So what's wealth mean to me? Well, I suppose if I really think about it, it's security of place. I mean, I've kind of moved an awful number, a huge number of times in my life, probably about 30 at the last count, and most of that was in my teens and 20s, and my childhood, teens and 20s. It started to slow down once I reached my 30s, but it was still quite a traumatic, because there's also something in me which is it's kind of encoded in my genes, or maybe it's karma or whatever it is, but I just seem to have this obsession with building community wherever I land. So if I was a seed, I'd land, put down the roots, and then start to sort of see what kind of community structures are and how I can sort of nudge it towards in a more sustainable direction. And so it's been great to sort of land, if you like, in the Lancaster Morecambe area 15 years ago and be here for all that length of time. I've literally never stayed in one place that long in my life, and it feels really, really strange in many ways. And it's allowed me to sort of get my roots in and network away and all of this. And I suppose one of the reasons for that being considered to be a wealth is the security, you know. So personal security is obviously important to everybody. So that sense that if you're in a place, if you know a place, then you know the lie of the land, quite literally. You know where everything is. You know where you need to go to get stuff. You've formed relationships with people so that you know you've got people who've got your back. And, you know, you're not just a stranger in a strange land. And all that's really, really important. And then at one point in my journeys and sojourns, and all that moving was in the UK, by the way. I have been a little bit in Europe, but that's not really living, that was sort of visiting. All of that sojourn, I've probably done a circuit of the whole of Britain and Scotland in all those moves. And when I was in Edinburgh, I got involved with a biodynamic market garden. I did a sort of biodynamic apprentice for a year. And I remember standing next door's biodynamic farm, which was about 200 acres. John, the farmer, took me on a tour. And I just felt this profound feeling of calm, being on land that was in the ownership of somebody who was a steward of it. And that just felt so right. You know, I need that. I want a piece of that. You know, I need this security. I don't want to be subject to, you know, the arbitrary whim of landlords or whatever as to where I can live and how long I can live in the place. So that's really important to me. And then money. I've always been, maybe this is, who knows, karmic, genetic, whatever. I've always been incredibly bad at earning money. So I am so absolutely useless at earning money. It almost doesn't matter what I do. I only ever get just enough to cover the basics. I don't get enough to build, you know, huge nest eggs and build a property empire, which is, I suppose, in some ways has been a thing. And over recent years, I've been thinking, well, maybe that's the way it should be, because, you know, what's the purpose of money anyway? It's, you know, what does it do? I mean, it only becomes useful when you spend it on the things you need. And it's the things that you need which add value to your life, not the money itself. So maybe not attracting lots of money isn't necessarily a bad thing. And then I thought, well, if I did attract money, why would I do it? Would I do it for myself, or would I do it for other people? And it seems better to think in terms of I started to think of myself as almost like a sort of a conduit for transferring resources on, because there's something about a healthy financial system or a healthy value system where resources, they flow and they circulate. They don't just get taken from one place, consumed and dumped in another place when they're done. Nature doesn't work like that. I don't think reality works like that. I think it's circular. It's what's a meal here is or what's waste here is a meal for some other system or creature or entity. So this circularity has become really, really interesting to me, which in a community setting is particularly important, because you build community by supporting others in many ways rather than yourself. And actually, I've kind of I'm sort of getting used to and quite liking doing things for other people rather than for myself. It's more intrinsically satisfying. Oh, Anna's putting her hand up. So
I want to challenge that you do things for others rather than yourself.
Oh, yes,
because I mean, I've been very much embedded in this idea of the regenerative philosophy, and underlying a lot of that is a deep understanding that we're all completely interconnected. To give something to others is to give something to the system that we are essentially part of. So it comes back around to you in the end.
Yes.
So I don't like that distinction of others and us. We are essentially the same. We're part of the same system. And I found a lot of calmness in not just thinking about that, but actually acting in that knowledge. Something changes in us when you think of yourself not only as an individual and separate from everything else around you, but completely part of everything else. It really changes. Well, it's changed my whole way and approach in life.
Yes. No, I agree with you, Anna, actually. Ian is
not
waving.
to disagree, but just completely intrigued, because one of the things I often do is reflecting on some of the, obviously as a Christian, reflection on some of the statements of Jesus, and I think we often kind of misunderstand them because we make them too religious. And for years I thought the notion that it's better to give than to receive meant, well, you do that, give somebody else somewhere somebody's keeping the tab, and that's kind of it. It's a good thing to do. What I've begun to realise is that there's profound wisdom in that the moment I put somebody or something else higher than myself, not denigrate them as higher than myself, in a paradoxical way, I benefit myself. Do you know what I mean? And going back to Anna's point about that regenerative stuff, actually, it's and the flip side is also true. I mean, it cropped up yesterday, and I talked with the Samaritans. I often put the question to groups about, you're supposed to love yourself, love your neighbours, you love yourself. If you then ask the question, how much do you love yourself? People really struggle with that. So just exactly what you're inflicting on your neighbour. But therefore, to cultivate yourself also helps cultivate others, and to give yourself to others also helps you give to yourself, if you see what I mean. So I think there's a profound religious or spiritual, take whichever word you like, truth in all that, really.
Well,
sorry, Michael, you've got two people at you now.
It's great. This is great. The cut and thrust of debate. I would say that there are fundamentally 4 different kinds of wealth, and one kind of wealth is self-awareness. How much do we know ourselves? And if we're looking at that kind of wealth, if I think in terms of, probably about 15 years ago. Oh, Anna's putting her hand up again. I'm going to let me just finish what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So about 15 years ago, I did some counselling training for various reasons, and I came across Carl Rogers and the techniques that Carl Rogers uses to analyse people's inner lives. And he started out as a classic Freudian, Jungian approach, where as a trained psychologist, he is an expert in the inner life, and therefore if you're in front of him presenting your issues, he knows your inner life better than you do because he's the expert and you're not. And he sort of had a bit of a revelation, really, and realized that he was not an expert of somebody else's inner life. He never could be, because that's impossible. All he could do was become an expert in his own inner life. And so rather than using his techniques on the other person to analyze them, while he was listening to the other person, he turned them on himself to analyze his own reactions to what they were saying. And then he gained insight not only into his own processes, but insight into their processes, and discovered that there's an empathic connection forms when you do that. And then when he said something, it resonated with the other person because they felt he'd actually got them, which meant they started to do it to themselves, and it validated their process. So there's almost like a catalytic process that happens around this boundary between self and other, where by putting the other person first, we absolutely do benefit because we gain insight. You know, but it's a tricky thing, because as soon as we gain insight, in a way it's like a constant process. We accumulate to ourselves more insight, so in a way we're bigger. So from a purely egotistical point of view, we know more, we understand more, we have more things that we consider to be our experience and does. And so we have to constantly be aware of that and let go and remember that actually, no, we need to be putting the other person first and listening from them. But then that just brings more insight. So it's almost like it starts to develop its own momentum and run away with itself. But it's a constant thing that we have to do. Now you can jump in and jump on top of it. Or jump over.
What are your other three?
Okay, that was okay. So the other three forms of wealth would be community fabric, which can either be healthy or unhealthy. Yeah, it can be rich or it can be threadbare. And I would say the driver in that is information. It's the amount of information circulating in the community. The more that you know about your friends, your neighbours, you know, the place you're in, the more likely you are to open up to it and invest in it. And the more secretive you feel other people are being towards you, more likely you are to go into sort of survival mode and hoarding mode and hold back. So there's a certain dynamic there, which I could spend hours elaborating, but I won't. And then the third one circuit is our wider environment. So the environment we live in, nature, the planet, which we sometimes forget we're part of, because particularly if we're in an urban environment, we have a world in many ways. We can live in that world without ever connecting with nature. I couldn't possibly live in a place like Tokyo. It would kill me, because I can't see a single tree or a blade of grass. But millions and millions of people manage to survive in that environment, completely cut off from nature. But of course, we can't be cut off from nature, because however much hubris as a civilization we have, where we think we've created something outside of that system, we haven't, and we never will. And so we need to understand it and cherish it in the same way we need to understand, listen to, and cherish other people. So that's the second one, the third one. And the fourth one is the world of our own creation, our stuff, and the systems that we create to manage our own stuff. And that, of course, includes the financial system and the monetary system that we've created. So those are the four, which happen to correlate with the four bottom lines that I've created within the Esther network.
Yeah, so the thing I wanted to say is that you said you believe there are four forms of wealth. And like I use a model, or refer to a model a lot, called the 8 forms of capital, so 8 forms of wealth. And they completely link into what you said. They just break some of those apart. So I'll read them out. So this model proposes that for us to have healthy economies, communities, individuals, we need to be cultivating these 8 forms of wealth. So the first is spiritual capital, and that obviously means different things to different people, but that like self-reflection, inner work, that's so important. Then you have the social capital, so the connections that we build in our communities, how inclusive they are, and the spaces that we create that allow for people to come together and build networks of support. Then you have all the material capital that you talked about, so your stuff, the houses, the raw materials that you have to build a house, or access to all of that stuff. Then financial capital, we live in a system where we do rely on money to buy goods that we can't source ourselves, that allow us to live and have security. Then you have living capital, so the health of the ecosystems around us, and what we're able to both access and give to those systems to help them in thriving. Then you have different types of knowledge, so intellectual capital, the stuff that we learn through reading, talking in spaces like this, all of this stuff that then guides our actions, and guides how we cultivate all the other forms of wealth. And then experiential capital, so not just knowing facts, but actually living and experiencing different approaches to doing things, and whether that's skills that we've learned and we have embedded knowledge of how to do certain things. So it's building that experiential capital in yourself and in your communities, and etc. And then the last one is the cultural capital, which I always think that sort of emerges from all of the others being in place. And with all these forms, I think they all complement everything that you've just described, Michael.
Very interesting system, yeah.
Yeah, and essentially all of them can be in different stages or states of health. And I always think that if you talk about this in any community, I'm sure people will add other capitals or wealth in as well. So I never like the idea of putting a number on the number of wealth we have, because that's adapted for place, I think, and for people. So your model works very well for Esther and you, but I'm sure that if you took this idea of wealth to any other community, I'm sure they'll add some other things in that we've not even thought about as well.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure I could break it down into, in a way, yes, reassemble it and restructure it in lots of different ways. That's a very interesting way. I'd like to see if Melanie or Ruta or David want to chip in and on anything at this stage, or indeed Ian.
I can certainly agree with what Anna just described, the merging of all these aspects, and especially if you don't compartmentalize it in any way, because it's actually living processes that merge together. And I think there we are touching upon a spiritual component where we are sometimes, well, I mean, yeah, I don't hesitate to say that occasionally there is guidance that you actually survive because you did not walk into a dangerous situation, for example. That's very interesting, because we are embedded in these neighborhoods and communities, and yet each individual thread of life is intrinsically very, very different. We can observe that in people's biographies. And again, it all merges, you know, the person next to you could be falling under a bus, whereas you walk completely unscathed right past that. And I think that is something momentous, something incredibly subtle, but also awesome, that is holding communities together and protecting individuals, and certainly having an influence on anything that is a living being. Now, yeah, I mean, I deliberately throw in something this big. It's been not easy for me to have that cohesion of community, this sense of being very rooted, even though I've been here a very long time too, but I have had to adapt to different countries, different communities, different languages, different cultures. And so I've packed, I sometimes joke and say I've packed 4 lives into one, which is why I talk about the guidance that leads individual lives.
I'm going to call that, Ruta, I'm going to call that predictive capital or serendipity capital, or both of those.
Serendipity, yeah, I like that.
And actually, it reflects upon what Anna's said, because in a way, that's the whole purpose of this session, is to explore different forms of capital, different forms of values other than the purely financial. So I don't know if Melanie or David or Ian, you want to add anything. I also want to make a comment on, because David flagged up, of course, cultural capital and the need for nourishment of the soul through, experiencing or participating in great works of art, or and that's really, really important. And that throws up another question, which is complexity and organisation, because that plays a role in what kind of structures and forms capital might take. So I just sort of throw that in as well. But yes, David, Melanie, Ian, any reflections?
Just a couple of things that you've mentioned about health and in communities, and people working together. And if you don't have that, it's very difficult. Because I feel I'm in that situation here where I live. And because I've been here a long time, so it's just changed completely from decades ago, and that is all to do with wealth, as in we've said, people having money, building houses, wanting their peace, if you like, and it's all about status and all right, well, you've got this, I want this. And it's all about money, which it's completely changed this community where I live. So yeah, that's all about money. But now the community that was once here is gone, and we just do not have a proper community anymore. And I feel very isolated living in it, because I am not on the wavelength of these people with loads of money at all. So I don't really have that much communication with them, and certainly don't have any relationship with my neighbours at all, very much. And the other thing was, talking about, we've got this wealth system and it's all money. And one of the things I'm trying to do with small groups that I work with over here is, in days gone by, we weren't always paid for work with money. And I do some of the work that I do, I get paid in goods. Like one job I did, I got paid in homemade jam and cheeses, and I got some flowers. And that was brilliant, and no money changed hands, and I'm absolutely perfectly happy with that. That was brilliant. So yeah, there was a lot more bartering and exchanging and that sort of thing, and I think that's much more healthy than just paying somebody in money. So yeah, that was my couple of thoughts.
Melanie, do you feel that the community that you live in has, in that context, over time has become more sterile?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Because somebody recently said to me, they made a distinction between the world that we've created, that the structures that created, the value systems, tend towards safety and predictability rather than adventure. So all your people there with your come in, and most of them are probably second homes, and a lot of them will be, but even if they're not, they're they're building their own little isolated worlds,
Yeah.
living in their own isolated world, very safe and very almost like little castles, aren't they? Really,
Absolutely.
that they never really come out of and interact out of. And I wonder, that brings up another form of capital for me, which I wanted to mention, which is, and I think you managed. I think it was one of yours, Anna. I think it was a sort of insight capital, or imagination capital, sort of creative capital. And for me, the counter of that is poverty of imagination. So we haven't really talked about poverty, but for me, one of the forms of poverty is poverty of imagination. And I'm trying to, over the last couple of years, I've been following very closely the work of the Morecambe Bay Poverty Truth Commission. And I think they do absolutely fantastic work, and are very supportive, because they are going into the community and they are finding people with lived experience of economic poverty, which leads to lots of other kinds of poverty, and maybe partly the result of other kinds of poverty. And they're helping those people tell their stories so they can speak truth to power, or speak truth to local agencies like the job centre or the council or whoever, who have control over their lives through the systems that they're part of, to make them aware, look, I'm a human being just like you, but this is my story and this is how I've ended up in this situation, and you could be here too. They don't need to say that. It's a very powerful process they have. And then they form this human relationship with the people in these agencies, and they try to work out together, how can we make this system better? Because how can we start to alleviate some of these problems? But one of the problems I've learned through that is that people who are poor feel very ashamed of being financially poor. There's a stigma to financial poverty. And I thought, why should there be? I mean, I've never been particularly wealthy in my life at all. So I've kind of learned to get a lot via other means other than paying for it. Barter and goodwill and what, however. So why should people feel bad about not having money? And then I realised that one of these people from one of these agencies said, well, my parents were very poor. I grew up in poverty, and I managed to get out of it. And I've managed to, and now I'm on this, successful treadmill to wherever you're supposed to go, the top of the pyramid, or wherever the treadmills all lead to. And I've blanked all that out, but I'm starting to think about it again. And I've kind of cut part of my life and part of myself off by doing that. And that's when I realized that in order to be successful in that, what I would say is a very sterile system, you have to actually cut yourself off from yourself in significant ways, which leads to a poverty of thinking and a poverty of imagination. And I thought, that's far more dangerous or injurious than not having money. So I'm not exploring ways in which one can create a new narrative where one can say, there are lots of other forms of poverty. Let's talk about those, and let's stop making people who don't have money feel bad about themselves.
Can I?
Go on, are you going to say?
I just feel I can't leave this without talking about privilege, and power, and how it's so important to understand the systems that have led to people being in situations of economic poverty, and to outcome that is extremely difficult, and it's not down to the individual to do that. It's down to the systems and society around people to support in lifting people out of that form of poverty. And when we talk about wealth, like a big barrier to people shifting from positions of economic poverty is self-confidence and self-worth and having communities or support around them, and that puts the onus on all of us to be able to support and help cultivate that within people as well. So I just feel that we should be very conscious of, maybe we all, like Michael, you talk about how you live with very little money. I mean, I could put myself within that as well, but I'm content because I have certain privileges that have allowed me to be content with this. And I can't leave this conversation without recognizing the power structures that exist and why certain people have fallen in different situations. I'll just stop there.
Good.
Yeah.
Ian, oh, sorry.
No?
Ian, do you still want to?
Just a couple of observations,
Then
really.
come back to you, Ruta.
I was intrigued by Richard's comment about guidance before. I would say that 90% of my visiting in the trust is done on the hunch, which is interesting. You kind of think, I need to go toward whatever it is, and you go there, and suddenly there's entire conversations open up. So I think there is and that's an important point to pursue and to explore, because I think, I mean, in one sense, I would say this because it's what I do, but I think a lot of the issues we have are a spiritual crisis to do with the inner life of humanity and its place within the world, how it understands itself. So I think that's something that needs to be explored at a level. I think as well, I'm becoming, as the conversation has gone on, less comfortable with the notion of capital, whether it's social capital, cultural capital, and so forth. And my reason for thinking that is that the moment you use a word like capital, which is legitimate in its right context, you begin to objectify things. And therefore you classify and categorize them. I'm much more comfortable with you know, a concept such as streams or rivers or whatever sources of life, rather than actual objective structures of life. I think is probably how I'd say it. The final point I make, Michael, is that you said you've been here 15 years. You've just arrived, mate. I'm sorry. That's just not. Hey, you're just a new lad. What's that, 15 years? It's nothing. I'll mention it to my dad when I see him next. There's a bloke who been here 15 years and he's from Lancaster. Are you sure about that? It's just...
yeah. Condemned to never have a home. But your second point's interesting. I'll come back to that. But Ruta, you wanted to say something, and also I want to see if Davey wants to chip in after Ruta.
Yeah, just that this illusion of status and power through capital has been bugging me for a long time, because in my lifetime I've had to mix with very, very rich people and extremely poor people, as society would see it. And as I was sort of listening in, I thought, yeah, but there are all these altruistic people who, as soon as they have some wealth, the good people actually have an urge to share that. They realize that they don't know anymore what to do with it. Now suddenly there's millions and millions milling around, and they have to do something with it. And there isn't enough creativity in one individual to actually cover all that. And somebody who is conscious of it would by nature want to actually share it, to actually do something with it. Like where there is an empty space, fill that. Where there's an emptiness of money, put it in there if you want. I mean, for simplicity's sake. Like I said earlier, you know, you can only share from a full cup. And when you have a full cup, it is again back to sharing. And I have actually experienced that really, really very decent people, when they came into wealth, they really wanted to do something for the world, for the community, for individuals. And they would just very quietly and modestly share, you know. Suddenly there would be an envelope appearing somewhere and something in another account. I don't know, I love nurturing that thought, you know, and it's highly uncomfortable to have this artificial construct of status and yeah, power, people associated with power.
You've raised quite a lot of really, really good points there, Ruth. Really interesting, and really making me think about, because there are lots of philanthropists in the world who are not just sort of neurotically obsessed with earning as much as their next door billionaire, or still keeping up with the Joneses, even though they are billionaires. That's one side, but there is this other side. There's a lot of people who are philanthropic and make that capital do good work. But the really interesting point you raised for me is that such a person is constrained by their own imagination and the vision of what that capital could do, and that opens up to me
something. Can
briefly?
I add something? One person said to me, "It's a bottomless hole. There's this flow of enormous wealth coming all of a sudden, and it goes on and on and on, and the person didn't feel in control anymore. There was fear because it was experiencing a bottomless hole. This was going into a bottomless hole unless this person decided to spread it out.
Okay.
Not accept that there's going to be this vortex of money, and it spins and it spins and it goes, there's more and more and more. And the same, I think, can also happen with poverty, where people feel, well, and then I will have nothing, and then I will have less than nothing. This person made it very clear. It was a conscious process. It's a bottomless hole, and it could just go on and on and on. And as soon as that changes, one would feel that one has to either preserve the status quo, or one has to begin to make it fruitful in some way. He didn't say fruitful. What did he say?
It's okay.
Sure,
I think we get the point. I'm going to throw that open and let anybody who wants to respond to that.
Yeah.
Can I backtrack slightly?
Yes.
I was just struck, we heard two different but interesting and useful sounding frameworks from Michael and from Anna about different sorts of wealth that a community can have and ways of classifying them. And I immediately thought, this reminds me of the people in recovery from substance abuse talk about a community assets framework, and I know that's quite influential with the local council. I mean, there can be a lot of these frameworks. Does one need to choose? Can one simply say that for any particular situation, a different framework may be useful? And it's not just talking about words, because if a community is trying to develop the ability to keep its people healthy, to withstand shocks and so forth, there are particular things about that community that enable it to be more or less successful in these objectives. And there are things that people can do to build up some things that have these desirable long-term effects, which I think is, maybe it's useful to call these different sorts of capital.
I think
because I think that's very sensible, actually, because I think there's an inherent danger in having various models, and is that if you apply a model too consistently to every situation, you move it from being a model and turn it into an ideology, and that's a very dangerous thing. So communities or organizations or people have to decide what model they wish to use to help them achieve what they want. So I think David's point is quite right about balance. One of the things that often concerns me is always in the back of mind, whether it's whatever group it is, possibly even including the Poverty Truth group, I don't know, is if you go to a community or a group of people and you say, we'd like to help you do X, if at some point they say, it's very kind of you, but we don't want you to, are you prepared to walk away? Because if you're not, you then become the imposition. It's the old Billy Connolly joke, isn't it? Which I sympathise with, not quite as bad as him, but certainly grew up in a situation where we didn't have money at times, where he said we were quite happy in Glasgow, and we didn't know we were poor till somebody came up from London and told us we were. And there's a great danger sometimes that we go to places with the answer when the people there have not even bothered asking the question or aren't really interested in the question. So I think the notion that you apply different models in different settings, subject to what people wish or desire to need or to learn, is important.
Absolutely. Maybe it's better to think about those models or that kind of stuff as tools. So we've got
whatever. That's right.
We've got a toolkit, and you go to if you go to a job, there's a burst pipe. You don't get your hammer out and start hitting it.
Yeah.
So it's and also this brings it back to landscape and sense of place. Like we're all our own landscape. There are different layers of landscape, but there's something unique about landscape. Every point on the earth has got its own uniqueness. It's its own place, and we're our own. And so you can't just go in there and do things to it and expect that to make a difference. This was exactly coming back to Carl Rogers, what Carl Rogers discovered with his person-centered approach to counselling. The only thing you could do something to really is yourself. I mean, I have a maxim, which is that nothing changes on the outside unless it changes on the inside first. Because otherwise, if you go back to that poverty of imagination, where you think you've got all the answers, you think you've been successful, you've ticked all the boxes, you've done all the things you're supposed to do, you've got your money, you're going to go to, not sure where you live, Melanie, it's not in Cumbria, is it in Cumbria or where? You're going to go up to where Melanie lives, and you're going to buy a big house with a big garden and an electric fence and all that stuff, and you're going to sit there and probably not ask the question, now what? What was that all for? You're just going to keep going round on like a broken gear that's not actually connected to anything. Well, that's not engaging with the world. That's not living in my book. And so if I mean, Carl Rogers discovered for himself at least, and I'm more alive when I understand you guys. And somebody else was actually, because I was Rudolf Steiner, when he's talking to teachers or whoever he was talking to at the time, said, we tend to think of ourselves as we look back at our lives and we say, oh, I have learned this, and I learned this, and I did this, and I did this, and now this is me. So but if you reverse it, and you think about all the people in your life who influenced you, who taught you that, who made that impression on you, who gave you that little hint, who helped you when you needed help, then you'll find that you are actually a huge community of people who have influenced your life and made, to some extent, crafted you as the person you are. So you can turn it completely inside out and say, well, I'm the sum total of you. Anna.
And just to add to that, you've talked about all the people you've met in your life, but also I find there's something very powerful about people I've met who carry or talk about carrying their ancestors with them as well, and how they have also informed and shaped them as well. And it brings a very rooted sense of person if you have that knowledge and carry it with you. Or that's my experience of people I've met who bring their ancestors with them to spaces and talk with them for them as well.
I fully agree with that. There's a Jewish whiskey called Ancestor, and I celebrate my ancestors every time I take a glass of it. So I'm quite.
Yeah, I can agree with Anna there. I had to, because of the sense of place that I could not have when the ancestors leave the country of origin. You become very conscious of the culture that formed these ancestors, and I've been exploring that in great depth and visiting the country briefly, and discovering a lot that actually formed me without touching upon the actual biography of my life, because in physical terms that wasn't happening, obviously. So my mind and soul actually had to reach out and find it, first of all, as Michael said, within me. And that changed, the perception of who I then was in the world. And it is these ancestors with their cultural input that is seeding forward, really. And then also in the social realm, has anybody else, I wanted to say that as an addition to that, has anybody noticed how with the lockdowns because of this COVID disaster that instead of being completely isolated, people have been reaching out more? I mean, I have neighbors here in my little street, which is fairly quiet and settled, and I hardly ever had any contact with people apart from waving and maybe taking in taking in some parcels, but they were actually reaching out and beginning to form to form connections and wanting to meet each other and wanting to get to know each other. So there's a little paradox, you know, that the more you are forced to withdraw into your own little bubble, the more you become aware of all the other little bubbles out there and want to start merging it. Certainly the people in my neighborhood, they very much had a will to do that. Yeah, just a little quirky observation here in this.
Well, certainly during lockdown, I've spent an awful lot of time on using Zoom. I've been in meetings with people from all over the world, and this sort of slow realization that, hey, in that sense of place is takes on a different meaning, because you know you can literally just as easily have a Zoom call with 6 people from Lancaster, or I know, Melanie, you're not in Lancaster, 6 people from Lancaster and sort of with a connection to Lancaster, or 6 people from you know, people from Singapore and Ethiopia and America. It's just as easy, and I've noticed that people have been making connections based upon their affinity with each other in a new way. And you know, maybe that's another form of wealth that we're discovering, is the wealth of connectedness, or the poverty of not being connected.
Yeah, just to build on that, Rita, that I have experienced that some people have reached out more, but then in hearing Samaritans yesterday, and then meeting someone the other day who fell over and was completely distraught, there's a lot of people that have also fallen out of those cracks of support and are very much more isolated than ever before. So it comes back to the idea there's a wealth in connectivity, and if you don't have that, you really fall out of a system of support, and that can bring around lots of other issues.
Yes, I can confirm that too. If you have health issues, for example, or I don't know, transport, all that kind of thing, a lot of people were jumping into their cars and going out into the countryside as soon as they were able to do so. And it only was a matter of days when they were inviting others along to those outings. And yeah, well, I'm not a driver here, you know. I'm trotting up and down the prom endlessly until I, yeah, kind of don't want to see it anymore, really. I'd give anything to be amongst trees and yeah, even different faces, grateful as I am for these neighbors who were reaching out and being immensely supportive, really looking out for the elderly and putting a food box out for those who run out of, you know, essentials, literally. Communicating, which was remarkable. Yeah, you can live there for over 10 years and you don't know anybody at all, and suddenly they are all swarming all over you. But it's a very, very basic human need to be acknowledged, to be seen and heard, and
yeah, it's yeah, I'm going to have to go in a minute. Yeah, it has brought out that support for your neighbours, and lots of communities are now together that weren't before. But yeah, then the other side, you've got the thoughtless ones as well, that we've been on the brunt of everybody coming out of lockdown as soon as they could. I'm in the Yorkshire Dales, Michael.
All right. Okay. I knew you were
yeah,
sort of around there.
Crisis, there's always the good and the communities working together, but then there's the negatives as well. And yeah, if you've been in isolation, that has made it so much harder for people in that situation. I'm just nipping out. I'll try and come back, but I will have to leave about 11:30.
Okay, well, okay. Well, before you go, one of the things I want to do before we finish is I want us to go around and reflect on whether any new values have been created for us as a result of spending this time together. So a little bit of feedback, but in terms of, you know, has it generated any new values for you in terms of you could say, what have you got out of it? But I don't want to be quite so pedantic. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. If you can come back, Melanie, then you can do that when you get back. But otherwise, if you think you're not going to make it.
Yeah, I'll only be a minute. I've just seen my mum wandering off down the drive, so I just need to go and check that she's okay. I won't be a minute.
So something that I haven't mentioned yet that I was going to mention, which is this new project that I was starting called the Zero Carbon Centre. And the idea there is to use our carbon footprint as a new way of measuring how wealthy or poor we are. Of course, that was in the title, so I better mention it. Which is it occurred to me, well, apart from the fact that it needs to happen, it's one of the things we all need to be working on. I think it should be our day job, everybody's day job on the planet, to reduce our impact on the planet as quickly as possible and come up with more intelligent ways of doing things. But of course, the carbon footprint's one of the key ways of measuring the success or failure of that. And I thought, well, we all have carbon footprints. And actually, if we're thinking in traditional financial wealth terms and the status that's attached to being somewhere on that spectrum, if we actually use our carbon footprint as a way of saying how wealthy we are, it completely reverses that scale immediately, because the chances are that the financially most wealthy are going to have the biggest carbon footprints, and the financially poor are going to have the smallest carbon footprints. So they immediately become more wealthy carbon footprint wise than the financially wealthy, who become the poorest. And I rather like that. I rather like the subversion that message can sort of bring. So that's something that I'm planning to kind of pursue, really. And the project that we started in that context, which is called the Plastic Bottle Top Project, is encouraging people to collect their bottle tops. I have a collection here. So and there's a project in Lancaster called Precious Plastics. So with my small green consultancy and also my Esther hat on, Precious Plastics is part of that network. We've started this bottle top, getting people to collect their bottle tops and get them to Precious Plastics to make new things, to create a kind of enclosed plastic loop of production and consumption and reproduction, collection and reproduction. And we're asking those people who collect those tops to take them to local independent retailers as collection points from where they're picked up. So we created this now, and that adds value at different places. It's valuable for the people that are collecting them for reasons I'm not entirely sure of. I find it really nice. I just love collecting them, and I love the sound they make. And there's a sort of aesthetic value, and it's valuable to think, actually, if I go to all the trouble and effort of recycling these, I know where they're going. I know exactly where they're going. I don't have to worry that they're going to end up in the sea or in a landfill in Vietnam or somewhere. They're going to go to Precious Plastics. Oh, and I'm going to take them to an independent retailer. I'm going to take them to, well, Single Step or Beach Bird on Morecambe Prom or Northern Yarn in China Street. oh, and that means I'm going to increase their footfall, and I might never have been there before, and I might be quite curious as to what goes on. I may even buy something while I'm there. So it starts to create these sort of virtuous loops of not currency, but a current through which values can be added and passed on at each point in the chain. And then once that's up and running, which it now is, one can add to it. So I've now got a local accountant and a local wealth management company to pledge that for every 100 tops that are collected, £1 will go to run the project. Half of it will run the project, and the other half will go to cover the operating costs of the Morecambe Bay Poverty Truth Commission. So that adds another layer of value, because these immediately become 1,000 times more valuable going through the bottle top circuit than just going in recycling, or even taking them to Lush, which is also recycling them and reusing them, which is great. So it's like creating these little win-win collections. And I'm bringing that up as a sort of practical, grounded. The idea is to ground some of these great ideas about how we create new ways of connecting and poverty into something that's actually, running, that we and then add to it and actually use that to start changing things. So I don't know if what you guys think of that, or whether that's that sort of using carbon as our impact on the planet is another form of measuring how wealthy or not we are.
It's again a consciousness process, isn't it? If I think back to my early days where people simply took it for granted that you don't go around trashing your environment because that is where you live. And that they always thought that they were living in some harmony with nature. So now we have the science behind it, as it were. We're talking about carbon footprint. That is something that is materially measurable, which of course these people didn't dream of measuring, but they knew if the weather was changing, or they knew if something was out of harmony and that it needed healing, whether that was the soil or a part of the forest. And so on.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I think it's interesting, and like Rita said, anything that makes you reflect on your impact is useful. But I also worry that there's so much emphasis on carbon when it's completely interlinked with lots of other issues. And I know it feels easier to simplify things down, but I worry that just causes other problems. So there are some tools and technologies that will lead to lower carbon footprints, but have bigger impact on other things like water or phosphorus or power issues or social justice issues. It's all completely interlinked. So I think it's interesting, but I am cautious of any initiative that focuses down on a single issue.
Okay, I mean, I can respond to that, which is, I agree, it is all interlinked. But I also think we need doorways, access points, things that people can relate to, that they can engage with. And in a way, you could say that, all the initiatives, all the businesses, if you just take Lancaster, Morecambe area, there are so many initiatives. In one sense, you could describe them all as a single issue, in the sense that there's a front door issue where they say, this is what we're about, and this is what we do, and this is why we're doing it. For me, what's interesting in that context is, well, what happens at the other door, the back door? How do these things connect with each other and talk to each other to be collectively working on, everything? Because no one person or one organisation can do everything or fix everything. So how is that working? How does this project? How do we critique each other in a constructive way, which makes us go, oh, actually, that's a good point. We should change this. We should be aware of that. We should adopt this narrative as well. David, Melanie, you got any?
Yeah, and as well, because we've got as well as the other issues, we've got the climate change crisis, which is a crisis and it's very serious, but there are still climate change deniers and all the different things that we're talking about. There's still millions of people just not even interested, not thinking about it, or not wanting to do anything, whether it's whatever it is in their lives, whether it's food or we're talking about money. They're not going to change because they don't want to, and that is very. How do we even start to link to these people, because they're just. I just don't know how we're going to even one aspect of all the issues we've been talking about. How do we even get them to think about one thing? Never mind the big crises that we've got. So yeah, it's difficult.
Okay, you've just thrown up another question for me there, Melanie, which is it's too big to introduce 7 minutes before we're due to finish, but it'll be how. Given that problem, and given that many of us have been working on these issues all our lives, and we feel, well, it's really easy to have a profound sense of failure that we have not succeeded in convincing enough people or changing things enough to do things. How much do we collectively, in that sense, suffer from a poverty consciousness when it comes to what we've achieved or the impact that we're having? And if we have that, are we not giving to those other people or those things a power which they don't really deserve? Because if we think in terms of the richness of solutions that collectively we have identified and have come up with and are trying to put into practice, often the biggest constraint is actually a classical financial one. We don't have enough access to the resources to make those changes, but we do have access to lots of other kinds of resource, because we've described so many of them today, that we do have access to make those changes, and those changes are happening. We are having an effect. So do we see ourselves, shouldn't we see ourselves as being immensely wealthy and actually, in that context? So that's a sort of question that we don't really have time to answer, because I want to spend the last 5 minutes just seeing if this time has been of value to you, and if so, what those values that have been generated might be. And we've only got a kind of a minute each to sort of go around and do that. So let's do that if you don't mind.
Sorry for butting in. Jan, Anna, you.
I can start. I was just going to offer. I feel very grateful to have had this time. Like, it's always nice to be able to explore bigger questions and to be reminded of things that I have explored, and to bring them back into my mind for today and maybe the next few weeks to just think through again. And I'm left with a question. I have a lot of discomfort about the idea of persuading other people to think the values and believe in the values I have. I don't believe that my values are right for everyone. And that's a difficult thing when I believe so strongly in a certain worldview and mindset, but I know that to convert everyone to my worldview and mindset is not the answer. So living with diversity and learning how to come together with other humans who have all sorts of different beliefs and value sets, I think that's something that I wrestle with a lot. So I'm left with that question.
David, you still there, David?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm digesting all the ideas. Certainly it's useful and interesting. I don't have anything particularly profound to say, but thank you.
It's what's been of value to you, so that's fine. Melanie?
Yeah, it's been really nice discussion, given me some food for thought, and what we've said and the different forms of capital, and that's not something I've really gone into in any depth. If there's any about wealth and that sort of thing, Michael, if you've got any good books or two that you can put in the chat to follow up with, that would be good. So yeah, I think it's been really beneficial.
Great, thank you, Melanie. Ruta?
Yes, as I started to say, that it is never an either or question. It very often is both.
And what has it been valuable to you, and if so, in what way?
In that I heard people understanding each other. We had our beliefs and our perception confirmed, I think, in a very wide way. What I call the common consensus, that we are on the same path here. So there is some combining force behind the body of thought and experience and our activities. Again, a common denominator. I have to be a little bit careful with these words.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Ruta. That's fine. It's kind of that's good. I'm going to be my values that I take from this are a little bit nicely prosaic, in that I wanted the people who attended the meeting to feel it had been a good use of their time and that they got something out of it. So the very fact that that seems to be the case, that's my value, that's my yield. I could go, yes, the intention was achieved, good, marvelous. And on that note, we're 1 minute from the end. So just a reminder that there is a feedback form which I put in the chat. If you want to if you want to access that, the easiest way is to just click on it, and it should just open a separate tab in your browser that you can sort of just fill that in. I'm sure Anna will be very grateful for that. Any feedback from the festival. I think you've done a marvellous job, incidentally, Anna, in co-organising this festival this year. The events are laid out in a very clear way on the website. They're all really accessible. It's really easy to sort of see what's happening and go through and to book on them. It's a very clear process. Yeah, well done.
Thank you. And just to let you know, there are going to be some podcasts that are being released now, today, tomorrow and Sunday, and they're really interesting. Ian's been the force behind that, so go and check them out.
And what's going to happen and there are other events available if you guys want to book on anything else. I haven't put the website for the festival here, but I'm sure you can all find it. It's Lancaster Health Festival. What's going to happen to these recordings, Anna? What's the plan?
They will all go onto the website.
Marvelous.
For those that couldn't come to the sessions live.
Marvelous.